In section 2.5, you're going to graph linear inequalities, and I just want to go over some of the steps that you need to do in order to graph. Now, they're very similar to lines. In section 2.3, you graph lines. You're going to add 2 additional steps. So the first step that's going to be added is you need to decide if the boundary line is dashed or solid. In addition to that, well, let's talk about this first. If you have less than or greater than for an inequality, the line is dashed. If you have less than or equal to or greater than or equal to for an inequality, the line is going to be solid. So you want to think of the underline, the bottom part of the symbols, less than or equal to and greater than or equal to, as representing solid lines on the graph. The second thing that you have to do is decide where you're going to shade. Are you going to shade above or below the boundary line? So let's do an example here. We want to graph the inequality. So just act as if you're going to be graphing a line. And this is where it crosses the y-axis, so we're going to go to 2. And our slope is 1. So our line's going to go up from left to right. And we already identified b, which is 2. So from here, we're going to go up 1 over 1. And I'm going to tell you, not a bad idea to make several points as you're going across your graph. The more points that you have, the better your line is going to be. Okay, so let's go ahead. Before we draw the line, now in section 3 you would just draw the line because it was an equation, but now we have to decide if it's dashed or solid. So we look at this little line tells us it's going to be solid, so we'll go ahead and go all the way across our graph. You want to cut your graph in half. Alright, now we need to decide where to shade. So, as long as you are in slope-intercept form, you can put your pencil on the y-intercept and ask yourself, okay, this sign says less than. So, is less than, I'm going to think of the numbers on the y-axis. If we just start at 2, what numbers are less than 2? Well, they're down this way. So that tells us which side that we need to shade. And you want to, so we're going to shade the half plane below the line. So that means that we want to shade all the way across our graph, because what we're doing when we're shading is we're saying everything in the shaded area, any points inside here, are solutions to this inequality. All right, let's graph the next one. We want to graph the inequality negative 3x plus y is less than or equal to negative 1. And we're going to first find the intercepts. So what I'm going to do is I am going to set the x, negative 3x, equal to negative 1. And then over here I've divided by negative 3. So that's going to give me x is 1/3. Now with the x-intercept, y is going to be 0. So that means my ordered pair is 1/3, 0. So I can go on the x-axis here, and we'll just kind of break this up into thirds. And that would be 1/3, 0. Now when we find the y-intercept, x equals 0. So basically I can cover up the x, and y equals negative 1. So 0, negative 1. Now again, I need to check here to see if it's dashed or solid. And because of this little line right here, that means it's going to be a solid line. So I'm going to take my ruler again. I'm going to go all the way across the plane, cut it in half. And now I need to decide where to shade. So if you're not in slope-intercept form, you have to be very careful, because remember what happens. If this is not positive, if it's a negative number, let's say we would have a negative 3 in front of here. After I move the 3y over, I would have to divide by a negative 3, which reverses the inequality. So real careful when you're in standard form. We want to use a test point. So we're going to use a test point of 0, 0. That's always the easiest one to choose. And then we have to say if it's true or false when we substitute it back in here. So let's take this, and we're going to do negative 3. So my test point is 0, 0, which means when I see an x, I plug in 0. When I see a y, I plug in 0. So negative 3 times 0 plus 0 is less than or equal to negative 1. So the question is 0 less than or equal to negative 1? And that is a false statement. So it's false on this side of the line, which means all of these other points here are false. They will not work in this inequality. So if we find the false side, we have to shade on the opposite side. You always shade on the true side. So this doesn't mean that this is always false and this is always true. You have to test the point to see if it's true or false, and you always shade on the true side. So this side is true. That's why we shaded here. So we tested 0, 0, and it was false. So we shade below the line. Okay, on the next page you have some problems to try.